From direct hate to hegemonic themes of oppression being reflected in film, the consistency of Hollywood in reflecting oppressive and racist ideas to the American people has been around since before movies even had sound, and shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. While all non-white European males have been targeted by Hollywood, what will be discussed here is post 9/11 Islamophobia and Middle Eastern hate in film and its similarities and ties to what is known as the yellow filter, with depictions of Latin America in American film. To understand what Hollywood is doing, one must first understand the context of what is happening in America. While Hollywood propaganda has been around since the time of silent movies, we will start in the 1950s and 70s. Through decades of systematic oppression and propaganda, America has become accustomed to accepting the all-white, middle-class, wealthy, suburban family with a working father and stay-at-home mother as the epitome of American life. This image of the nuclear family is what America was viewed as for a long time. If you didn't fit this image of the all-white, suburban nuclear family, you weren't the vision America was putting out, and you wouldn't be represented. Well, this nuclear family goal is unattainable to many due to systematic oppression, generational wealth, racism, homophobia, sexism, and more. If we take a look at many Hollywood films and television shows, we see this depiction of the nuclear family as the most common form families are depicted. Where this image is most rampant is in the genre of television sitcoms, most, if not all, in the 50s to 70s depicting this nuclear family image. While most of these show the nuclear family, or some wacky depiction of it, the message was sent to the American people. This is what America was. When we enter the late 70s to 90s, we see more variation enter the scene, with many black families starting to get depicted in the sitcom and movie scene. Here, in the 70s, we see the rise of what is known as blaxploitation, which is the rise of independent films by black filmmakers with black actors featuring music by lots of black artists. While the name might sound negative, the movement was insanely positive and is an example of groups fighting the Hollywood propaganda machine. Notice, however, these films were independent, not being funded by Hollywood. But why? And how does this tie to post 9/11 Islamophobia? One way to think of what's happening at this point is that America is changing, but Hollywood remains reluctant. Now, as we enter the 2000s, 9/11 has shaken America to its core, and America has entered war with Afghanistan. With this war comes Hollywood military films, most likely made to gather American support for the military currently at war. We get movies such as Iron Man, 12 Strong, American Sniper, and many more. Where these movies differ from movies such as Apocalypse Now or Saving Private Ryan is that rather than showing atrocities of war post-war, they glorify these wars both during and after. They gather public support for the wars and play on American Islamophobia at the time following 9/11. We see movies such as the Has Fallen series, which depicts the life of the president's bodyguard, all starring Gerard Butler, and all glorifying the act of killing and depicting many Middle Eastern and Muslim people as the villains. There's a line in the London Has Fallen movie from 2016 that inspired this project, as seen above. Gerard Butler then goes on to fight and kill the man after saying this. This line was shocking as it seemed like such an ignorant, closed-minded, and racist comment, yet this is the hero of the story. I understand in the context these men are the villains, but we must bear in mind the fact that someone wrote this and thought it was appropriate to spread closed-minded messaging in this film, given what was happening in America. To me, this plays on fear-mongering and using Middle Eastern hate as a way to get people to gather together to make white executives money. The movie was written by four different people, all white. What Hollywood has done and these writers have done is create a hostile post 9/11 world using the fear and lack of understanding many Americans have. This movie was made less than 10 years ago, and this Islamophobic sentiment is very much still strong and rampant within Hollywood. This is Hollywood pushing hegemonic and oppressive narratives in favor of white American men, motivating violence towards the Middle East and people of Islamic faith. These go to further press narratives in favor of Islamophobia, all by playing on fear for profit. Another example is Iron Man from 2008. Tony Stark is a literal weapons manufacturer and dealer. He sells missiles to the American government in favor of using them against the Middle East. In the first scene where Tony Stark becomes Iron Man, we see the Iron Man suit being used to kill several men who had kidnapped Tony Stark. These men were Middle Eastern, and of course, the audience is meant to root for Tony Stark in this moment, even though he had created weaponry that had destroyed the country these men were from. The movie also works to enforce Islamophobia narratives, depicting a white billionaire arms dealer as the good guy, and this movie, like many other superhero movies, depicting murdering the enemy as a usual thing to do, which falls in line with classic military propaganda. We are not supposed to feel any remorse for the Middle Eastern men's Stark murders, and we are meant to root for the man who has contributed massively to the destruction of their country. What's even more disturbing about this is the fact that Iron Man goes on to inspire an entire cinematic universe, with 36 movies going on to follow. 36 films built on a movie that promotes Islamophobia, violence, and closed-minded narratives. But how does this tie to Latin America and the yellow filter? For this, we must look at a whole other array of films and TV. Take Breaking Bad, one of the highest rated, most watched, and well-reviewed TV shows of all time. How does this critical behemoth depict Latin America, you wonder? Crucially different from how it depicts North America. All scenes that depict Latin America, mostly Mexico, use a yellow filter. This is so important because it shows Hollywood creating a difference between the two regions despite being literally attached. This yellow filter is a giant statement that says, Latin America is not the US. This filter helps differentiate the US from Latin America and informs the viewer we are no longer in the US. How does this tie to Islamophobia in film, though? Well, to understand that, we must understand the Latin American context. Stuart Hall's The West and the Rest, Discourse and Power aims to provide an understanding of why this occurs in film, particularly in the representation of Latin America and Middle Eastern nations. It all starts with the way America defines itself, as a Western nation. While this may just sound like an ordinary direction, it's so much more than that. The title of Western nation separates European nations along with America from other nations. It's a form of othering. Hall states it sets a certain structure of thought and knowledge in motion. The title of Western nation works to set these countries apart from others. Hall elaborates further on how this is done and the effects this has when he says, it functions as a part of language, a system of representation. Here we see how important and prevalent the labeling has become in everyday American society. The yellow filter and frequent use of violence in action films against Middle Eastern people is representative of this concept of there being Western nations and then other nations. The movie works as a part of this discourse or ideology that Hall discusses, which seeks to set America and Western nations apart from other nations. This Islamophobia and yellow filtering works as discursive formation, or a tool of this discourse, that is setting nations apart from one another. The key idea to note here is that Hollywood works to depict the white, American, middle class to wealthy individual as the hero. To do this, any culture that is not American is put down and made explicitly to feel or look different than how the US is depicted. This is oppressive in nature by showing that America is the neutral default good guy. Any other culture is depicted as consistently evil or different, but never as an equal. This lack of equal representation goes on to impact the way people view and think about these cultures they see depicted. People see the yellow filter and think Latin America is not the same as America, and this creates divides in culture, much like people seeing Middle Eastern people often depicted as villains and the American killers as the heroes. Hall also discusses that this othering creates a sort of power scale in the world. Hall states, fourthly, it provides criteria of evaluation against which other societies are ranked and around which powerful, positive, and negative feelings cluster. For example, the West equals developed equals good equals desirable, or the non-West equals underdeveloped equals bad equals undesirable. Hall pretty clearly lays it all out here. The narrative and language formed through years of oppression, propaganda, and misdirection have created narratives of other nations and countries that we often see depicted. The yellow filter may work as a form of othering, but when one looks at how Mexico or Latin America is generally depicted in media, such as Breaking Bad, we see cartels, drugs, violence, and underdevelopment. Much like in the Middle East, we see war, violence, destruction, and more. These depictions don't seek to accurately depict anything, but rather further push along these flawed and racist narratives. With all this said, movies do exist that are anti-oppressive and seek to much better represent war, Islamic nations, and Latin America. Just this year, A24 released Warfare, a movie that depicts American troops as invaders in Iraq and shows the atrocities of war rather than promoting it. What was especially nice to see with this movie was the controversy it raised upon release, with many refusing to see more pro-war films. Although this movie proved to be anything but pro-war, it is extremely great to see the general public becoming fed up with these narratives. Another film, Coco, from 2017, from Disney, is a bright and colorful depiction of Mexico and Mexican culture that, aside from flashback scenes, lacks the yellow filter. Another example from this year, Superman, depicts war as an atrocity, with Superman really valuing the lives of people within two Middle Eastern nations currently at war in the movie. With this, we see an opposite approach to Iron Man. While Hollywood still releases many movies that work as a discursive formation for the othering Hall discusses, many movies that seek to uproot these narratives and the oppressive nature of these narratives are also getting made by studios and directors who genuinely care about the context of what are they releasing.